The final chapter of the 2025 Iran-Israel conflict began before dawn on June 13, as the world slept, unaware of the storm about to break. In the quiet hours, a sense of uneasy anticipation hung over Tehran, the city's skyline silhouetted against the first hints of daylight. Under the codename Operation Rising Lion, Israel initiated a massive, meticulously coordinated assault on Iran. Dozens of sites were targeted simultaneously, ranging from bustling urban centers to isolated military outposts deep within the country. The operation was unprecedented in its scale and ambition. Israeli F-35 jets and long-range missiles struck with surgical precision, aiming to cripple Iran's military infrastructure and nuclear capabilities in a single, overwhelming blow. The attacks were swift, calculated, and relentless, leaving little time for Iranian forces to react. The Israeli government framed the operation as a necessary preemptive strike. Officials insisted that Israel was acting to prevent an existential threat, as intelligence suggested Iran was on the verge of achieving nuclear breakout capability. The world's media scrambled to make sense of the rapidly unfolding events. The world watched in shock and disbelief as explosions lit up the Iranian sky, transforming the night into a chaotic tableau of fire and destruction. For millions, it was a terrifying spectacle that signaled a new and dangerous phase in the long-standing Middle Eastern conflict. Advanced Israeli stealth aircraft and precision-guided missiles overwhelmed Iran's air defenses, focusing their firepower on command centers, nuclear facilities, and the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The speed and intensity of the assault left Iranian commanders scrambling to mount a response. This attack was the culmination of years of planning, intelligence gathering, and technological innovation. Israeli analysts had mapped out Iran's most critical infrastructure, seeking to disrupt not just military assets, but also the country's ability to coordinate and recover. As dawn broke over Iran, chaos and destruction spread across cities and countryside alike. Emergency responders rushed to devastated sites, while the Israeli government insisted that the operation was aimed solely at the regime and its military apparatus, not at ordinary civilians. Yet, in the fog of war, civilian areas were not always spared. Reports of collateral damage and civilian casualties began to emerge, fueling outrage and fear both within Iran and around the world. Operation Rising Lion marked a point of no return, sending shockwaves across the globe. The international community braced for the consequences as the balance of power in the Middle East was forever altered by the events of that fateful morning. Operation Rising Lion's true impact was the systematic elimination of Iran's senior leadership. Key figures like Mohammad Bagheri, Chief of Staff, and Hossein Salami, IRGC Commander-in-Chief, were killed in the opening strikes. The loss of Amir Ali Hajizadeh, mastermind of Iran's missile program, and several top nuclear scientists devastated Iran's military and scientific core. Deep underground bunkers, once thought impregnable, were breached, wiping out decades of institutional knowledge. The attack also killed Gholam Ali Rashid, head of joint military operations, further crippling Iran's ability to coordinate a response. In hours, Israel dismantled a leadership structure built over decades. The regime was left reeling, facing a sudden power vacuum. Iran's old guard was gone and the nation was thrown into confusion. The blow to Iran's command left it vulnerable at its most critical moment. Despite the chaos and confusion that gripped the region, Iran's military command responded with remarkable speed and determination. Within just a few hours of the initial attacks, Iranian forces began to mobilize, signaling to the world that they would not let such aggression go unanswered. In a dramatic show of force, Iran launched a barrage of missiles aimed directly at Israeli territory, targeting both military and strategic sites. The night sky over the Middle East lit up with the fiery trails of dozens of ballistic missiles, each one a message of defiance and resolve. Israeli air defenses, including the renowned Iron Dome system, sprang into action. Their interceptors raced skyward, successfully neutralizing many of the incoming threats and preventing even greater devastation. Yet despite these efforts, some missiles managed to slip through the defensive shield, striking perilously close to vital infrastructure and densely populated cities. The resulting explosions shattered any lingering sense of safety among the civilian population. Air raid sirens blared across Israel, forcing millions of people to seek shelter underground. In cities like Tel Aviv, families huddled together in crowded bunkers, anxiously awaiting the all-clear as the war arrived, quite literally, on their doorstep. The conflict quickly escalated into a brutal and relentless exchange. For every Iranian missile that landed, Israel responded with its own powerful airstrikes, targeting Iranian military positions and infrastructure deep inside Iran. Explosions rocked Tehran and other major cities, sending plumes of smoke into the night sky. Emergency crews scrambled to respond as both sides targeted each other's military assets and critical infrastructure, leaving destruction in their wake. The war soon devolved into a grim war of attrition, with neither side willing to back down or show any sign of weakness. Urban landscapes were transformed into battlefields, and the cost in lives and property mounted with each passing day. Iran's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds surprised many observers. Despite suffering heavy losses and repeated strikes, Iranian forces regrouped and continued to launch counterattacks, determined to prove their strength. The ongoing missile duels underscored the high stakes of the conflict, as both nations demonstrated a willingness to absorb immense punishment and risk further escalation. Across the region, a tense silence fell. Ordinary people watched the news in fear, while empty streets and curfews became the new normal. Many wondered if the violence would soon spill beyond Iran and Israel, dragging the entire Middle East into war. The final days of the conflict were marked by relentless violence, uncertainty, and a growing sense of dread. Civilians on both sides struggled to find safety as the attacks continued without pause. Around the world, leaders gathered in urgent meetings and millions watched anxiously, hoping that the conflict would not spiral into a catastrophic regional war. The fate of the Middle East, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. Israel's main focus was Iran's nuclear program, striking Natanz Fordo and Isfahan with bunker-busting munitions. The goal: render Iran's nuclear facilities inoperable for years. The Arak heavy water reactor was also targeted, aiming to dismantle every stage of Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran tried to retaliate against Israel's Dimona nuclear site, but Israeli defenses held firm. Most Iranian strikes hit conventional military bases or civilian areas, failing to damage Israel's core assets. Israel deliberately spared the Russian-built Bushehr power plant, avoiding environmental disaster and diplomatic fallout. The attacks on Natanz Fordo and Arak were a high-stakes gamble to checkmate Iran's nuclear program. The nuclear chessboard had been violently reset. In the aftermath, Iran's regime scrambled to fill the leadership void. Supreme Leader Khamenei quickly appointed new commanders to project stability and maintain military response. State media broadcast images of new leaders, vowing revenge and rallying public anger. Civilian casualties mounted with heart-wrenching images fueling national outrage and unity. Funerals for commanders and civilians became massive public spectacles, channeling grief into defiant nationalism. The regime used the crisis to consolidate power and frame the conflict as an attack on the entire nation. Despite internal grievances, the external threat fostered unity. Iran's public mourning became a tool for regime survival and resistance. The war sent shockwaves through global markets, with oil prices surging and stocks plunging. Fears of disruption in the Strait of Hormuz drove Brent crude up 7% in hours. Stock markets worldwide tumbled, erasing billions in value as investors fled to safe havens like gold. The economic fallout threatened global supply chains and fueled inflation. Higher oil prices put pressure on businesses and consumers everywhere. The financial world braced for prolonged uncertainty as the conflict's impact rippled across continents. The war's economic battles were fought on trading floors as much as on the battlefield. The interconnectedness of the modern world was laid bare by the crisis. While Israel launched its counterattack alone, U.S. military support proved absolutely vital in intercepting the waves of Iranian missiles. American technology and expertise, from advanced radar systems to missile interceptors, played a decisive role in shielding Israeli cities from destruction. American warships and fighter jets patrolled the Mediterranean, working seamlessly with Israeli forces to defend against the unprecedented barrage. This joint operation not only showcased the strength of their alliance but also sent a clear message to adversaries about the depth of U.S. commitment to Israel's security. Yet the U.S. found itself walking a diplomatic tightrope, supporting Israel's right to defend itself, while urgently working behind the scenes to prevent the conflict from spiraling into a wider regional war that could draw in more nations. Intelligence assessments suggested that, for now, Iran was not actively building a nuclear bomb. This complicated Washington's position, as it sought to balance deterrence with restraint and avoid giving hardliners in Tehran an excuse to escalate further. The risk of escalation was immense. Hezbollah in Lebanon, heavily armed and backed by Iran, could open a devastating second front at any moment. Meanwhile, the Persian Gulf's vital shipping lanes faced new threats, putting global energy supplies and economic stability at risk. The UN Security Council was deadlocked, unable to agree on a unified response. Europe, despite its concern, found itself with little leverage to influence events on the ground, or to mediate between the warring sides. Around the globe, ordinary people watched anxiously as breaking news flashed across screens. The fear was palpable. One miscalculation, one stray missile could draw in more powers and ignite a much larger war. The conflict exposed the fragility of global peace and the stark limits of international diplomacy. Even the world's most powerful institutions seemed unable to halt the slide toward chaos. In these final days, the war was no longer just a regional struggle. It had become a global crisis, with repercussions felt in capitals far beyond the Middle East. The specter of a broader conflict loomed over every decision, as leaders weighed their next moves with the world watching and waiting. The world was left on edge, gripped by uncertainty, and wondering what the next chapter in this dangerous standoff would bring. The war was the result of years of escalating provocations and failed diplomacy. The IAEA censured Iran for obstructing nuclear inspections, prompting Tehran to escalate its nuclear activities. Iran announced new enrichment facilities and advanced centrifuges crossing Israel's red line. Recent months saw direct Iranian missile and drone attacks on Israel, breaking old taboos. Each clash pushed both sides closer to all-out war. Iranian rhetoric hardened, with officials hinting at nuclear weapons capability if ordered. The combination of technical advances, open threats, and direct attacks created a perfect storm. Israel's leaders decided the time for waiting was over. As the fighting subsided, both nations faced the aftermath of devastation. Israel had achieved its military goals but shattered the regional status quo, facing new threats from Iranian proxies. Iran suffered immense losses but survived, quickly appointing new leaders and rallying nationalist sentiment. The path ahead for Iran was perilous: rebuild or seek revenge through covert and proxy warfare. Ordinary people in both countries faced grief, exhaustion, and anxiety about the future. The psychological toll was immense, with deep scars left on both societies. The war reset Iran's nuclear program but planted seeds for future conflict. The international community, having failed to prevent war, now faced the challenge of managing its aftermath. The uneasy calm was not peace, but a pause before the next round. The region's future remained more uncertain and dangerous than